which is pegged at 30 hours a week. There's no doubt in my mind that there's a hollowing out of the part-time workforce between 30 and 40 hours. The folks in the administration and supporters of the law would say, well, we believe that employers will want to provide health coverage to remain competitive. And I agree with that. That's totally true. But it's not true uniformly. It's not true in certain parts of the country, and it's not true in certain sectors of the economy, principally hospitality, retail, and restaurants. Indianapolis again, I eat out all the time. I consider it a triumph that I now make my own breakfast. But dinner time, I'm eating out. And last July, I was at a local restaurant. I sat down, and manager Patrick says, how you doing, Mark? I say, how are you doing, Patrick? He sits down with me, and I say, what's happening? He says, well, last week word came down from corporate. From now on, only 4 of our 75 hourly employees are allowed to work more than 30 hours a week. Up until that time, he scheduled employees for 37 hours a week, not 30. That was the target. You couldn't, the red line was 40. You couldn't go over 40 hours because of the rate variance, the cost variance. The point here is that employers will find the line. They will find the line, just as they do in the tax system, of what is the most efficient, cost-effective answer. And there will be a certain number of unintended consequences. And the way we're dealing with this is just nuts. We've staged an intervention in 17% of the economy, and we're not adjusting it. How many of you have ever seen a business where they develop a business plan, and then they go secure their $10 million of financing, and then what they do is they just say, well, we're sticking to this plan until we're either Intel or we're broke. Is that the way you do it? No. You adjust, but we're not adjusting this standard, this important statute, this important intervention, because on the one hand, some of us want to kill it, and some of us are afraid it'll be gutted. That's irresponsible governance. It also, it colors everything else, including tax reform. Tax reform, when I speak about tax reform, I speak about 4 or 5 different attributes. The first is permanency. I believe that while complexity is a difficult issue and a challenge for the system, you need to remember that fully 2/3 of Americans don't feel the direct impact of that complexity. They don't itemize. They take a standard deduction. They file a very simple return. Their documentation requirements are quite limited. What is a real driver, I think, of problems is the lack of permanency, this whole issue of the extenders. I talk to businesses around the country, and people say, you know, can't they just get things done on time and make decisions? People will adjust to rates. They will adjust to different provisions. But this on-again, off-again tax code we have is crazy, just crazy. I think that the progressivity question is largely settled. I wouldn't expect your taxes to go down. That was hammered out in the election. If anything, I would expect over time taxes on the well-to-do will increase. I believe in progressivity. I think it's a feature of our democracy that has served us well, that those who earn more pay relatively more. Complexity does obscure understanding. It creates confusion in the code for the taxpayer, for the business owner. And it creates opportunities for those who would seek to pay less than they should to do so. So we should simplify. We at Alliant support just exactly what you're talking about, though, in terms of making sensible choices as you do so. Again, in Indianapolis, I would take the tough calls. I have a condo that I own. It doesn't really matter whether I rent or own that condo. When I was working for Mitch Daniels in the state government, I needed a place to live. I wasn't going to live in Mexico or Canada or India. But whether we provide a robust incentive for research and innovation or some of the other benefits that are important to businesses and creators of jobs, that does determine our relative success? Does the American century continue, if you will? So I think we need to make the tough choices. It's hard to see that happening, though. It's hard to see that happening because in our representative form of government, nobody gets elected or re-elected, more importantly, for saying, hey, I got you voters in New Jersey the same deal that the guys in Ohio got. Isn't that great? Not the way it works. You try to benefit your constituency, and that's a strong point of our democracy, but it represents a real challenge when you get into an ever-enlarging tax code. And what you've seen is a very thoughtful proposal that's come from Chairman Camp in the House Ways and Means Committee, but it has created now an avalanche of concerns, and we have concerns on some of the provisions as well, because of the effort to get down to the lower rates and what has to get out. So I think the only way that happens, people ask me, somebody was asking me last night, Dave Sullivan was asking me last night, is this going to happen this year? The answer is no. I think fundamental tax reform will only happen if a candidate for president campaigns on fundamental tax reform and then wins. I don't see it happening absent that leadership. And certainly this president has not said much about comprehensive tax reform. He has said, I'll do everything I can to get gun control and immigration reform, but he hasn't said the same thing about taxes, and his Treasury Secretary has said, we're not going to do comprehensive reform, we're going to do business reform. Chairman Camp has said correctly, I believe, and this is a position that you have, that entities engaged in similar economic activities should be treated consistently under the code, irrespective of their tax structure. That's an ACEC position. That's a position that I believe in strongly. That is simplification, that if you're doing something, the same thing, why should you get a different tax treatment just because you're organized differently? So it's very complicated to do the business tax reform without affecting the individual tax reform too. And that's what he's saying. So I don't see much happening there. The extenders, though, the Senate has passed a very comprehensive, generous, robust plan. And now the House, in fact, just today, is starting to look at certain provisions like the R&D and pass out a very limited series of initiatives. And we'll see where this goes. We'll see where this goes. The IRS itself, it's in a tough spot. And it's in a very difficult environment. The first job of the commissioner is always to deliver the filing season. That's the contract. Americans, they send in their return and they get their refund. And 80% get refunds. And the refund amount, it averages almost close to $3,000 now. So they've got to deliver that filing season, and they've done a good job at that again this year. They have the problem, I gathered Director Hayden spoke about identity theft yesterday. This is a real threat to the tax system right now. The identity theft that is going on is challenging that contract because when the service tightens the programming, and then a legitimate return filed by a school teacher or the assistant manager of a Target in suburban Chicago gets held, and that individual is used to taking a spring break someplace and is waiting for that refund, they are not a happy camper. On the other hand, if the programming is too loose, then billions and billions of dollars go out the door. And so the services devote a lot of resources to this. It also has to deal with the Affordable Care Act. It has very significant responsibilities under the Affordable Care Act. The systems work that is done to support all the transfer of data, that's been done well, but now that gets to the more difficult process of having to ramp up the enforcement over the next year in terms of the compliance with the individual mandate and then the business mandates. So all of that happens in an environment where there are lower resources than there were some years ago. The service has, through its own errors in the C4 mess, the political targeting mess, taken what is a difficult image and reputation and caused further problems and generated a lack of confidence on the Republican side. And frankly, more seriously, there's a cohort of the American people now, 5 or 10%, I don't know what it is, or 15%, and this converges with the NSA actions. There's a chunk of people that, as you travel the country, and they're not here in Washington, they're in other places, who are, they really feel that they now have the evidence between the IRS and the NSA of this overreach of government. So all that comes together, and it makes for a very difficult passage for the IRS right now. And particularly, it's going to get worse, I would tell you, because with the ACA coming online, the controversy associated with that will just get people more torqued up about the IRS. The IRS didn't write this law, but the IRS has to deal with it. So I think it will be a long time for that agency to work its way out. I draw this, going back to Vietnam, the military was largely discredited after Vietnam. And it got worse. The low point came in 1980 when we couldn't get our hostages out of Iran. And we lost choppers and personnel in the desert. And we were all ashamed. But the military came back. The military, it was led by President Reagan and the Congress. They put a lot more money into it. The institutions, the services themselves entered into reforms, and then we enjoyed some success in Kuwait. Let me just tell you, there will be no happy war for the IRS. No one is going to say, "Attaboy, we're glad you're back." There's not going to be that moment. So we're in a period where taxes are going to remain a tough issue. Let me just close with this issue of independence. I've always believed that, and I felt I was privileged to run the service, that there are 3 agencies of government that have to be run and have to be viewed by the American people as absolutely non-partisan. Those are the FBI, the CIA, and the IRS. We have to feel that way so that we can trust our government because of the enormous power that those institutions hold. I always felt that I was given great deference in my team and that everybody got it, that we needed to be independent, and particularly in enforcement matters, seen as judging things the way we wanted to. And I probably really realized, I'd just tell you one story that sort of showed me the sensitivity, that there was a great sensitivity to this. I was in London on a Friday. We'd done an international conference with tax administrators from European countries, China and India, a very successful conference, we felt. And I called back on Friday afternoon to the office. I said, "Any messages?" And so Yolanda said to me, "No, just one." And I said, "Okay." She said, "Carl Rose called." I said, "I don't know a Carl Rose." And she said, "Well, he knows you." And I said, "Okay, what's the number?" And sure enough, it was a 456 number, which meant it was the White House. I said, "Could that be Karl Rove?" And she said, "Could be." And, so, and I knew Carl a little bit. I worked on the creation of the Homeland Security Department. We didn't travel in the same circles at all, the stuff I was doing when, as Dave indicated, I was the Deputy Director of Management. But I knew Carl a little bit, and you'd sit down with him in the White House mess and chat and everything. But so I called, sure enough, it was Carl, and he said, "Mark, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get you in trouble. I just want to know what day of the week and at what hour should I call your toll-free line and be able to get through to somebody." And I said, I don't know, Carl, but I'll find out for you. So I did. The point is that everybody knew that you don't reach in. And actually, the other point is the person in my office did not know who Karl Rove was. So there you go. We need to get back to where we get a functioning system of government, a functioning tax code, and a respected IRS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Listen, I'm sure some of you have follow-up questions for Mark, but Mark is going to be in the Chief Financial Officers Forum in the Wilson Roosevelt rooms, and you're all invited in there, at least to the extent that we're going to fit those in that are interested. But Mark, you've given a fantastic presentation, and I was glad to hear that you worked for Mitch Daniels also, who's been a great presenter here. He's been, in fact, he was with us at our last convention. So thank you very much, Mark Everson, and we look forward to having you back with us again. Thank you.